we'd like to welcome you to the first ever DevCon, Tampere, and community. So that's why this event is now here. Our program reflects that theme throughout. So there's going to be postmortems, stories of failure and success and learnings, and then there's going to be the keynote, which is going to happen soon. We're going to have a really interesting panel discussion about how we can work together in the future, and how can we, this is the first thing that we try now to bring the community more together and to collaborate, but the point of the panel is to discuss how to bring it even closer in the future. So yeah, and there's going to be lunch, don't forget that. It's free, and there's going to be more info after or before we go to lunch. There's bathrooms right next to the door. We're going to stream, and the video of this event will be available in YouTube as a video on demand later. So if your friends didn't get a ticket or missed, got sick or something, they can still watch the thingies. And what else? I don't know. I think we can start. I think Tyni is ready. Yes. So the first thing we're gonna have is Mikko Tyni talking about the kind of the history, the mystical history of Tampere game development. So let's give it up for Mikko. Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone, from my behalf as well. And my topic is story of game industry in Tampere. And this presentation is kind of a mixture of a historic review and also lots of subjective experience and how things have shown out from my point of view. So here is first almost like a legal tender disclaimer which says that how I collected this information. This is mostly from public registries like Finder and Asiakastieto, and then from newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and a couple of thesis works, and on top of that, personal interviews and experiences. And I would really like you to raise your hand and point out if there is some factual error, because game companies are very, very hard to research in a way that if we learn from a registry that company has been founded in 2003, it doesn't mean that they really started operations in 2003, or on the other hand, if company is still technically existing, it might have actually gone into a complete stealth mode a couple of years ago. So this is one thing I observed, that just relying on registries and like official sources isn't the best way. But let's see how it goes. Something about me. I have been around quite a long time. I started game-related activities about 1999 due to a game called Grand Theft Auto and Grand Theft Auto 1 modding, where I then got to know other Finnish people who also had modded Grand Theft Auto, and they included, for example, Antti Lehto, who is one of the founders of Colossal Order. So we did together kind of a mod package called GTA Finland, and other people joined in, and that in turn led to kind of a network effect where we then met guys like Sami Kalliokoski, Peter Finberg, and a few others, and ended up basically having a demo group, although we only participated in assembly game dev competition and not actual demo combos. And then I count myself as professional developer since 2005, because that was the first year I really got paid more or less of doing this. So I'm a TTVO dropout, technically studied a bit over 1 year at TAMK, and it was known back then as TTVO. And after that, all my training has been basically just doing projects in companies. So my career path in very brief is that I started in art role in our first company, Aukio Group, later on at Universal Mode. Then I was one of the founders of Colossal Order and creative director there for first 2.5 years basically. Then another company which I founded, Fragment, I was there in multiple roles. It would have been a long list, so basically I just included the main role where I basically steered the creative side for some 4 years. And then I have been consultant, freelancer, advisor, kind of a hired gun for many companies, including Bon Games, Fakefish, LogicNap, Reforged, until Reforged then hired me for a full-time position earlier this year. And right now I'm art manager there, basically running the art outsourcing and also internal art team. And besides being a game developer, I'm also a history buff, but moving in very turtle speed, but getting my first real publication in this December. And the topic of that is actually assassination attempts on Marshal Mannerheim. Just wanted to let you know that I have some background as historian, but I'm no way like very into game development history. So this was for me quite a challenging task. Anyway, structure of this lecture is that we first go through the epochs as short chronological review, and during that I'll point out some of the companies and some of the bigger development patterns and changes on the timeline. And then there is so-called Tampere pattern examined, which is defined by reproduction by dividing. Then possible mystical Helsinki effect is discussed. And finally, we'll go through some identifying characteristics and characters of Tampere development scene. So, we'll start from prehistory, and the first year I could date the prehistory, given my sources, was in 1986 actually. There is a company called Trojosoft, which is still around, a very mundane computer store nowadays, but they published 2 computer games for C64, Kultakuume by Jukka Tapanimäki, and then 2 smaller games, Talvisota and Roller, in 1987, which were basically meant for the Finnish market. But the first real game studio, if we can use that term, was Aimsoft Finlandia, which was established in 1989 around that mustached fellow, Jyrki Kummola, who basically collected the first group of 4 or 5 developers, most of who are still around, like Harry Granholm, who lived in Tampere back then and who is nowadays, and I'm not sure if he still is, but at least used to be creative director at Grand Cru. And this Aimsoft Finlandia had strong technical university connection. Their coders were basically assistants at the university. And their best known title is Coloris, which is here portrayed on the right. But this is very difficult era to get info of, because many people who were involved in game development back then did it only on hobby basis, and they have been completely out of scene for almost 30 years or more. But Tampere people were also active in demo scene. For example, Bike Rapers, which originated from Iisalmi area, had multiple members from Tampere, and then there were like complete or almost complete Tampere demo groups like McCurrent, Alumni, Artline Designs. So Tampere actually had quite strong demo scene backing. And also first professionals started to evolve during this prehistory era, if we define a professional by a person who is doing games full-time and getting paid of it. Because most people didn't at that time. If you have just watched this Matkailuopedi-alalla, or the series based on it. Mr. Hans Zenjuka, who most probably isn't here now, at least claims to be the first person in Finland to have a full-time contract as a game developer since 1993 or something. This is based on pub talks with him like a year ago, so my memory doesn't probably serve the most exact way, but around that time in any case. Then age of the bubble, which some of us already might remember, at least from a teenager point of view. This was really an era of buzzwords. IT bubble as a term was introduced to the Finnish glossary. Everyone talked about multi or hypermedia. Then there were WAP, J2, ME, and so on. These were the words of the era, and this was characterized by rise of Nokia all over Finland, but especially in Tampere area. It was a very strong actor here, and it had its research center in Tampere that had game-related activities in a way that there was graphics research, there was usability research, and some of the people from prehistory era then moved to work there, like Hans Zenjuga. And also at that time, first companies in Tampere to employ full-time game developers, or at least people whose activities were close to game development. There was multimedia Zanzibar, established in 1992, and they did basically everything that was within umbrella of multimedia, like presentations, company videos, interactive entertainment, games. There was this own IP Galilei series that was also transformed into a TV animation series, and I managed to find that at least 2 titles were published as CD-ROM titles, Galilei and Lost Toys, and Galilei 2. So the 3D dock on the right is Galilei, and the map on top is a meta map of one of the Galilei titles. And one of the really old schoolers of Tampere game industry, Mr. Henry Root, who most probably isn't around, he was a designer on those titles. So he's one of the also longest running professionals. But then something unexpected happened, and Helsinki-based mobile game company Spring Toys, that was established in 1999 by Housemarque, and I think there were a few other companies also behind it. They extended their operations to Tampere, and Mr. Taneli Roininen, for example, was involved at that era, and also Mr. Zenjuga. But then we go to an era where I have personal experience. So now I'm not talking that much as a researcher, but rather also a participant. So Java mobile games for early smartphones was the household thing, and now we can say that first real game studios were founded in Tampere. By real game studio, I mean studios that focused completely on entertainment games. And these were Universamo, which had its background in academia, University of Tampere, Technical University, by 3 guys, Markku Hakala, Lasse Hirvonen, and Atte Kopiranta. And again, we can say that Universamo was founded in 2002, but it actually started operating so that it had full-time employees only a couple of years later. And then another company called Rocket Science, or shorter, The Rocket, also started around the same time. I couldn't find the starting year, but I guess it's 2003 since their first game was published that year. And it was built on demo scene people, so basically rocket science people came from completely different origins. But Universamo's growth started in 2005 when they moved from own IPs to work on licensed titles, and that was a very smart move back then. License holders were able to pay for high quality products, and that in turn then helped to facilitate growth. And the problem was that there weren't enough game developers available in Tampere, so the way Universamo grew was by 2 acquisitions. There was a company, DI Code, or Decode, founded by a group of diploma engineers, as you can basically think of the name, and I think it was 6 or 7 programmers that joined Universamo at that time. Also, they had a new CEO coming from that background and so on. And then about a year later, they acquired a company called Aukio Group, which me and 6 other industry novices have founded at late 2005. Mikko Pernu, Sami Kalliokoski, Antti Lehto, Antti Isosomppi, Seppo Santapukki, who were there with me. And we worked on a couple of quite funny projects before entering Universamo. One of those was Markku Uusi-Paavalniemi Kurlin, which is already kind of a legend because it has been mentioned multiple times, but it has never been shown. And the problem is that I wasn't able to find any decent image of it, since I only had my work laptop and it didn't include my 15 years old portfolio, so I didn't have anything about it. But it was a game that was really like the most advanced curling simulation of the time. We got the idea when I was sitting with Mr. Santapukki at Soho, which was back then a brand new thing in Tampere, like a proper English pub, and they were showing was it Salt Lake City Olympics, or I can't remember where it was. In any case, they were showing curling, and we realized that as it's portrayed from top down, it actually could make a quite nice sports game. And none of us were sports games enthusiasts, so that was also a good point. We made a game where basically the character generation system was the funniest part, and it had this random option that generated you accidentally like Finnish celebrities of the time, like Spede Pasanen and Jone Nikula and a few others could be found from your team. But then we teamed up with Markku Uusi-Paavalniemi, who was kind of a like short-term legend back then, and our CEO Mikko Pernu was the first one who managed it to get through to Uusi-Paavalniemi by phone the very moment he emerged from an airplane. So he had like dozens of journalists around, and he could only speak like half a minute, and the discussion was basically that yes, 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 and I'm not sure if he ever listened to what was actually asked, but we ended up collaborating with him, and it was like very interesting experience because he also had programming background. He's a trained engineer, so he had an opinion about almost everything. And he said that it's very important for casual players that you are able to manage the temperature of your curling arena because it affects the sliding of stones and so on. So Antti Lehto had to build, together with Terje Koskinen, who is nowadays at Supercell, had to build quite a sophisticated system. But in the end, it was never published. It went right into lockers of THQ after the acquisition. But that's about Aukio Group. Then Universamo had roughly 40 people at that era, so we were 7, and Decode I think had 7 or 8 people. That already like doubled what Universamo had back then, and then a few other people came in, and also lots of trainees were coming from Tampere Polytechnic back then. People like Karoliina Korppo, Johannes Kivikangas, Juha-Matti Pulkkinen, and so on. But Universamo was then acquired by American THQ in 2007, and it was a very decisive move to get a Tampere-based company under umbrella of a larger, very well-known American publisher, and that brought completely new set of problems, but also allowed expansion. Universamo opened a studio in Helsinki, for example. I think it was also in 2007 or early 2008. Does anyone remember better? About that era, I think it was. But the reason why the acquisition happened and why Universamo was such a big player back then was that they had really invested lots of effort into their own technology platform called Nimbus. Because back then you had over 400, 500 handsets to support, and games of that era were basically manually ported from platform to platform. So Universamo could do that automatically, have one game made that, at least in theory, could be launched on hundreds of platforms simultaneously. So that was really a competition edge. And also Universamo was the first company to operate professionally. By this I mean that they had established structure, they had producers, clear roles between programmers, artists, designers. So it was kind of academy of game development to those who joined it in the first epoch. But also Tentons, who is, I think, sponsoring this event, was also founded at that era and still going very strong, as we can notice. Then there was a company called Second Brain, which started as Wired Man. Not sure if Wired Man was a company or a team, but it was making basically a modification game like a military shooter called Jäger, and it was for that time very advanced game, but I'm not sure what really happened to that company. They tried multiple games and for some reason they just didn't find the fire, and I think their operations ended in 2007. But also Moido, which is around, was founded at that time, and I had long talks with Henri Sarasvirta, who tried to explain to me 10 minutes that what Moido actually did back then, and I couldn't find a single sentence how I could sum it, because it sounded that Moido basically made everything that brought money in. And it had been a good strategy because they are still around. But this is interesting that this other activity had actually no ties to Universal, so it was independent of that. Of course, people knew each other, but there were like quite strict barriers between these other companies and Universal. There was no real collaboration, for example. And also NeoGames organization was founded in 2003, but a couple of years later it really started to be run professionally, so that it wasn't just a one-man operation, but rather kind of an umbrella for the Finnish game industry. And it was also originating from Tampere, although it's a national organization. But then we can point out two things that really changed the way industry operated. First one is iPhone, and second one is Steam, or digital distribution. And these affected Tampere game industry as well, and really kind of were the reason why it steered the way it did. So I decided to call this the offspring era, because Universal published in total some 60 mobile titles, if I counted everything. It still had economic problems, mostly due to the way THQ was managing the company. One metric they used for performance was that headcount needs to be in constant rise. And they, at least as an employee, we had an impression that the only way they were checking that company was in balance was that headcount was bigger than it was last time. So Universal really grew quite a lot. It brought its problems, and projects they were having simply couldn't cater to the economy. So layoffs started in around 2009, and it still tried to resist for a couple of years. But the first wave of layoffs called for voluntary leavers, and there were people who already thought that, okay, now we have seen enough of this, maybe it's time to try our own wings. And I started to talk to people who have been with me at Aukio Group that maybe we should get back to entrepreneurship. Maybe we should try again now when we had some more experience behind our belts. So me and Antti Sosompi, Antti Lehto, and Samsa Semi, who was a game designer at Universal, decided that, okay, we'll go that way again. And then a bit later on, we hired my old high school friend Marina Hallikainen to become our CEO. So Colossal Group was among the first leavers, but also another group around Mika Rosendal that started to gather at the same time, went to find Q Games, and then yet another group, or rather a pair of people around Arto Koistinen founded Dicework Games. So that was like the first wave. And later on, the second wave came companies Traplight, Prank, and Tuokio. And of course, this is a bit of pulling things straight in a way that Traplight was founded in a quite strange way, that there was first a game made by anonymous people, and only later on a mystical company evolved around it. The hero, which can be seen on top on the right. And maybe the title from Q Games, which I chose to represent the company, Knights of Pen and Paper 2, published by Paradox, isn't actually from that era, but I think just look at the best, and I had hard time finding very old Q Games titles from Google. And then Trouser Heart here represents Dicework Games. Prank was an effort of 7 people, I think, and some of those who had been around with Aukio Group, like Mikko Pernu and Seppo Santapukki, were key members there. And Tuokio was a bit different story. Jouni Salonen, a businessman from Tampere, was already starting game development when he then collaborated with Atte Kotiranta, who had actually bought Aukio Group's business identity to himself. So basically we can say, if we just look at the company ID, Y-tunnus, Aukio Group technically came Tuokio. Tuokio started to really be an independent company in the second wave of Universal layoffs, but it wasn't directly connected. Then Manse Games project was kind of a response to a situation that the biggest ship had collapsed and many smaller ones were emerging. So it was really important source of support and also source of information and kind of a project that helped industry to set a foot. Suvi Latva has major role in that. A new factory, an old industry complex in Finlayson area, hosted many of these first and second wave companies. They provided quarters and basic equipment and also lots of information, and eventually had game developer circle gathering regularly around its events. So they were very important catalysts. Then game jams started to happen in 2010. This information was again given by Mr. Henry yesterday, so I think that's correct. And University of Tampere Game Research, of course, is worth mentioning. I think it had started earlier, but at that era, it really started to be a known and renowned factor. And then Rovio entered Tampere, also to kind of fill the void. There were still lots of people, lost souls from Universal, so they provided a nest, and Atte Kotiranta started to lead Rovio at Tampere. So we can say that those people from Universal who didn't go to found their own companies pretty much ended up at Rovio. And iPhone was really a decisive factor in the fail of Universal in a way, but also in the providing lifeline for these companies that were founded at that era. Colossal Order was the only one that focused entirely on PC games, so we were kind of a different startup from others who went to the mobile train. Then there was the growth period, how I would call this second post-Universal epoch. So companies like Fragment, where I was one of the founders, and Kopla and Greener Grass were founded. Fragment was basically some of the people who had left Colossal Order, combined with people from other first wave companies like Mr. Arto Härkönen from Q Games and a few others. But also Fragment attracted some completely new talent in Tampere area, student background people and those who aspired to enter industry. And then Kopla was basically guys with Rovio background who had been around for quite a long time, like Ilkka Siik and Janne Jaakkola, for example, came from Rovio and Vilppu Tuominen. Then Greener Grass was, I would say, continuation for Rovio Tampere. And Atte Kotiranta was again key person setting that up. And the specialty of Greener Grass was that I think it had 17 founders. So everyone who was around became a founder. And Henry Root again was also another key person both in Rovio Tampere and Greener Grass. Then there was clear difference on what companies are doing. PC focus with publisher was continued by Colossal Order, and also us who were founding Fragment adopted that strategy. So we wanted to work with publisher. The main reason was, of course, to get financing for running the company and making the games, but also like search for security. Because PC self-publishing really started to emerge at that era. It has been around for 10 years, but first companies whose strategy was to work independently and publish in Steam started to appear around that time. And then Dicework Games continued on mobile focus as Q Games did, and then also Traplight, Tuokio and Kopla. So we can say that Tampere was quite heavily mobile focused still at that time. And interesting note was that investors now started to notice Tampere, that there is this weird city in Finland, and already Finland was like a well-known thing. First wave of big mobile studios like Digital Chocolate and Mr. Good Living had established the footprint for Finland. Remedy was a big thing, Bugbear, Housemarque. So now Finland became to be known as mobile game capital of the world. And Bates, which was focused on edutainment, had this Lola Panda series, got the first big funding round in Tampere. At least I guess that was the first one, since I couldn't find any earlier ones that really like broke the news. And then we can call Age of Rock Stars, which we are probably still living. There are three companies I would like to point out: Colossal Order, Kopla and Traplight as rock stars of the rock stars, in a way that they have succeeded very well economically and gained global recognition for Tampere. Traplight may be mostly for its complete different way of doing things, getting major investments and acting like a real mobile startup. So we still shouldn't forget Tenton's silent stability and success story, I would say, because if we just look at numbers, they have been going super strong over years, but they just haven't been that much in the mainstream news. I already mentioned Greener Grass on the previous slide, but actually it happened only in 2015 that Rovio killed the Tampere studio. So this is basically a continuum. The same people want to stay together and make themselves new quarters for that. And then my previous company, Fragment, I would like to mention it as a catalyst company in a way that I think Fragment has most offspring besides Universal from Tampere companies. So at least 3 startups, Skydome, Dreamloop and Bon Games, have spinned off from Fragment over the years. So I think that's partly a reason that we attracted lots of ambitious young people who wanted to do their own thing, because what we could offer was only to work on more and more firefighter games. The problem was that we had a German publisher back then that always wanted to have some new addition. And of course that was okay for us, since it meant more money, but then we ended up, for example, making 4 territorial versions of Rescue 1, like British version, American version, French version, and so on. We had these 2 guys, Johan Takeda and Samuli Lautjärvi, who most probably hold a world record on creating virtual fire trucks. Like, these guys created for us over 90 different fire trucks. Just to say, like, an example number. Publisher versus self-publishing approaches are still around, although we can say, besides Colossal Order and few others, it's mostly self-publishing nowadays. And then, when we have examined the timeline, it's time to draw some conclusions, and I call this a Tampere pattern. So we basically have company A, and something happens. A turning point, more or less. It can be as dramatic as a closure, but it can only be a shift of paradigm or some major personalities causing hassle inside the company. So something happens, and companies B, probably also C and D spawn. And what happens to B, C and D? One of them today might get an investment, another one might have a success title, not maybe world-class success, but at least to an extent that they can start growing. And most probably there is also company D that files for bankruptcy. And again, we are in the same loop. So I'm not sure how much this is original Tampere thing. We can observe the same in Helsinki as well, but in Tampere it has happened multiple times and on a quite tight time scale. So I would call this, at least on historical perspective, a Tampere pattern. And then this spider's net illustrates what I have told you during the last 20 minutes. So we can see Universamo here as the center point, and those marked in light blue are the first wave companies. And by this I mean that at least certain key people have followed those paths and been active in founding those companies. Not everyone has moved that directly from here to there. But we can see that Colossal Order, Q Games, Dice Work, Traplight, Prank and Tokyo were like direct offspring of Universamo. And then those marked in red are like second wave. From Colossal Order came Fragment, also from Q Games came people who were founding fathers of Fragment. Then from Colossal Order later on came Hologram Monster, that also had some DNA from Prank. Then from Tokyo, not that directly, but via some spins came Rovio Tampere, from which came Kopla Games and Greener Grass. And from Fragment, oh, I completely forgot Ionic, I'm sorry, I said only 3, but now I have marked it here. So Fragment has 4 children, basically, and out of Ionic has already born Random Potion. So this is what I managed to record. And then we have those independent actors again, like Ice Flake, 10 Tons, and Moido, who has been completely out of this bold and beautiful style dramatics.
We are the weird uncles.
Exactly. And then this is something that doesn't really cater all companies. As you can see, Moido is missing, Ice Flake is there, but many are missing. I just wanted to point out on a kind of horizontal scale bars how these companies have been over timeline. I would have needed like 3 times more vertical space. But here we can see the Universamo phenomena's effect. So it ended in 2010, but actually already in 2009, and companies like Q Games and Colossal Order, as I already mentioned, took off. Hypercani is mentioned here because it has been around for a very long time. And again, it's playing in the same series with 10 Tons and the like, so that it's not part of the Universamo phenomena. Then Bates also going its own way. And then it was very hard actually to try to position them or to draw like genuine length photos, because Tokyo, for example, is technically still alive. Miikka Harjuntausta is now running Tokyo in Helsinki, but it's not the same Tokyo in a way, although Harjuntausta was already involved in original Tokyo. So I decided to kill Tokyo in 2017 because it tweeted last time in 2017, and if it doesn't tweet, it doesn't live. So that's the judgment. And then Random Potion has so long a name that it just became Rand Pot. But okay, in the beginning I mentioned the Helsinki effect. What is it, and is there such a thing? Fact is that 48.5% of Finnish game companies are still Helsinki based, and I really think this number isn't going to decrease, at least not a lot. This is based on NeoGames' quite current statistics. But for Tampere, I would say Helsinki is a negative push-pull factor. Tampereans are hating Helsinki, and it's maybe the reason for the fact that it's very hard to recruit senior people from Helsinki. Many companies have attempted that, Universamo did, and the reason they founded Helsinki Studio was that it was almost impossible, even in THQ backing, to get people from Helsinki. We also experienced the same at Fragment. It was really hard to try to headhunt people from there. But then on the other hand, not much of Tampere people have slipped to Helsinki. Only during the last couple of years, some individuals like me have gone that path. But it's also that only very recently the train has started to move to other directions. So I think something is happening, but on a very individual scale. There is no mass migration between the cities. And most reasons why people may be attracted to Tampere, not only from Helsinki but also from abroad, are personal ties. You know someone here, you want to work in the company where you know people. For example, demo scene starts to be that kind of nostalgic factor again. If you are able to work with people you did demos 15 years ago, it might really be a good reason. But also quality of life has at least been said to be better than in Helsinki. That is hard to judge, but it's often mentioned when I read through interviews why people move from Helsinki to Tampere. But then we can find this kind of sociology from Tampere game dev scene. We have quite clear junior, senior and veteran layers. I think veteran is basically people from the 90s companies, still remembering Zanzibar and Spring Toys, and then Universal era. And seniors are those who has been around for, I would say, 5 to 6 years already in Tampere, qualifies one as a senior. And we have constant stream of juniors from 3 universities, or actually some of them are now combined, but basically there has been this continuous source. And it's interesting that if you scratch the surface of almost any Tampere company, you can find one former Universal one or someone who has been around in the company spinning from that. So that disease is still around, very strong. But also very strong camaraderie and kind of a gathering spirit has been around, at least from the closure of Universal. So IGDA Tampere chapter was founded in 2013. It became kind of an official catalyst, but before that already a circle around Arto Koistinen and around beer started to be the thing. There is a reason why the two things are combined. Or Arto is not a team but a person, but still. These were very important factor getting game developers together. And they were usually held in O'Connell's, and it was really important social tie before the IGDA era. But also game developer summer parties by Mika Roosendahl Circle and others around it, at least from 2012. And also there are neighbor events like Nörttikulttuurivisa, which isn't actually a game developer gathering, but if you go and see, 90% of people have some connection to game industry. And it's also, people very often talk about game development there. And then also company parties with after parties have been open to people from other companies as well, so they have been also an important form of gatherings. And now comes the most interesting slide, maybe. I had complete liberty of choosing names of people who can be described as kind of influencers, starters and figures. Maybe legend is too strong a word if the whole scene has been around for 15 years. We are not NHL, but still, I think that people on this slide are those who have more or less influenced the scene, either in good or bad or both. Actually, this is not a Hall of Fame or Hall of Shame, and everyone here, I think, has been on both sides of the desk. But just to point out a few important names, Atte Kotiranta, since Universal, has always been around when there is something major happening in mobile, be it Universal, Rovio, Careergrass. Anna-Kaisa Kultima is really a household name. She has been around in so many important projects, from Pelimuseo to IGDA to Game Jams. So she really merits a mention. Then we have these bands of brothers, Sarasvirta brothers, Kratset brothers, Jouni and Jani Nummela, who are really also important players, have been around for a long, long time, and very often you can find at least one of those brother dingies if you go to any jam or any gathering. Then we have very successful individual players like Otto Ville Ojala, whose one finger games are legendary and who has been around for a very long time. Jyrki Kummola was really the original founder of Tampere scene in a way that group around him started the industry. Juuso Salmijärvi, old demo scene guy, founder of Rocket, and had been very active in Tampere demo scene from the 90s. He was pointed out by Ravintola Konttori's restaurant manager Antti Hannula, who is also a very old demo scene fart. And it shows that people who have been around didn't always end up in game industry. You can also end up in a beer restaurant, and even on the right side of the counter. So that's also one possible destiny. Karoliina Korppo, Jukka Oukkauppinen, Sampo Töyssy, Tero Alatalo, Manu Setälä from Tekes was very important godfather for many projects. He helped Colossal Order to be established. He has been very often the secret essence in initial funding of many companies. With Fragment, he actually almost rewrote all our applications to a Tekes language so that we could get positive decisions. Then Minna Eloranta was very active in the early IGDA and was constantly around when something was happening. Suvi Latva is actually a player on national level, but still to be mentioned also here for Manse Games project. And also that's the reason I didn't include Mr. KP Hiltunen, because his activities have been always on higher than Tampere level. Then Marina Hallikainen and myself and Joni Lappalainen are kind of maybe company founder types, also Arto Koistinen. But Arto Koistinen, as I mentioned, has been also very, very active in the social side of the scene. Teemu Haila, who I think still works for PlayRaven in Helsinki, he was very important in building up the TAMK game developer community Score and bringing professionalism to all sides of Tampere game development. Riku Rakkola has been around for a long time, first at Universum1, then as the key person of Traplight together with Jari Paananen. Miikka Harjuntausta is a one-man genius who has always found one new way to do things and was also around in the later epochs. And Hans Tsenjuga, he mostly merits the place for being around so long. I hope I mentioned almost everyone, but yeah, Damien Morello, a Unity legend, Seppo Santapukki, one of those persons that no one has anything negative to say about, and that's already an achievement. He has been around from 2005, and I have never met anyone cursing him. So he's really the most jovial guy out there. Ilja Johannes Kivikangas, who maybe isn't here, and not many of you might know him, but he was also around from 2003 at least. He had a short stint at Helsinki at Dijon Chocolate and also at Red Lynx, but he was with Universum and he has worked very successfully on VR, so he has published a couple of VR titles operating from Tampere, so I also wanted to include him. And Mika Roosendahl, of course, another legendary founder. So, this is basically what I had on the official deck, and I still want to have special thanks to Arto Koistinen and Henri Sarasvirta and my former assistant from Fragment, Mikael Immonen, who is also a professional historian and who wrote the short history of Tampere game development from Universum era, which unfortunately I didn't have access, but at least I managed to talk with him and we both tried to reminisce what he had written 5 years ago. So, thanks to you, and if you have any questions, just ask.
Let's give a big hand. This is not
I personally think that was super awesome to hear. As a kind of novice in the industry, only 4 or 5 years, most of this I've heard from founders and CEOs and key person, like snippets of the story.
Yeah.
But to see the whole and the timeline was very interesting. We have some time, like maybe a couple of minutes for questions. So does anyone have anything to ask from Mikko about this whole situation? Please take the mic.
Even getting a microphone. Great. All right. So in your diagram with the Tampere company patterns, after the turning point, it said company A gets an investor, company B lands a hit or whatever, and company C files for bankruptcy. What is the actual distribution like? It's not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, is it?
That's very good question. That would have required 1 extra week of going through all the companies and their official records so that we can have like scientific data. But just to throw some kind of answer, I'd say that most companies in Tampere don't really succeed, but neither don't file for bankruptcy and also don't get investment. Basically just continue their eternal life in a way that sometimes they might have 10 people, sometimes 3 people, and they kind of wait for the best moment. And I didn't actually have that box on the slide, but I think that's the most common destiny, at least historically, that they have gone in kind of a stealth mode and then getting up again when the right moment happens, if it happens.
Any other questions? This is the moment. Of course, we can continue the discussion during the breaks, and those who have the sauna ticket can continue. Okay, Arvo has something.
Hi, yeah, thanks, really great talk. But do you remember the company that made the floorball game, the Sähly game?
I really...
I don't remember their name, but
yeah,
they
I know that
in some place in Tampere.
Yes, I know that company. I can't remember its name. I think no one can. It's really a mysterious one. They had like pretty good looking stuff, and they I know at least one person who was involved in that. But no, I actually can't say anything about them other than that they had been around from 2006 or something. But if anyone can say the name out loud, now it's a good time. Which was the company that made 3D floorball game from Tampere and was mentioned a couple of times in Pelilehti.
Maybe we can think of this question during the...
That's the only description I can give.
Yes, I think we're going to have like 5-minute break, so you can go to the bathroom, and those who came late, find your seats and everything. So let's take a short break. Let's give one more time to Mikko. And be back at 11 sharp when we go into a post-mortem. let's continue. The break was short, but we'll have to lunch soon, so we can do this. Okay, so those who came a bit later, thank you all for joining in. This is the first ever DevCon Tampere, and we hope to organize this in the future as well. We just had an amazing review of the history of Tampere game development. I think that's going to spark a lot of discussion during this day and even further in the future. But now let's hear from one of the children of Fragment and what happened. So Anti's gonna...
Children of Fragment, 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 ch fragment, in a 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 fragment, fragment, in a 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 fragment, in
are very cheap in this country or in game development in general. We would just blatantly copy it. I would say. The concept is proven, and it's like a funny, timeless depiction of war. It was a funny war game with some really cool kind of. It had a message. The design was really nice in that sense that really kind of left an impact on everybody who tried it. And I don't know anybody who doesn't love Cannon Fodder who tried it. Maybe it's a bit aged nowadays, but still. The retro factor was kind of, it was a good approach in that sense that it would kind of already have a concept of how to kind of start marketing it and kind of bring it to people and kind of have like some kind of notion already what it is. So we wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel, we would just say like, yeah, go and play Cannon Fodder and you'll love this, right? John Hare, who was the original designer and the founder of Sensible Software, was actually working with Sociable Soccer in Helsinki at that time, and we were thinking that maybe it's a good idea to actually approach him and get like a bit of this like hype machine going through that. That was the first product plan, and as Mikko so eloquently put it, it was all revolving around beer at that time. So we would gather up and make these plans in a bar, which so often happens with this approach. All right, some graphics. Here you see a bit of like concept art. You see some later stuff, but basically we would just take whatever Cannon Fodder had to offer, a top-down camera, mouse controlled kind of like a group of soldiers that would fight its way through missions after missions. The amazing death mount of the original one, which is at the center, which is probably the coolest thing in game design ever, which is like if in cannon fodder one of your soldiers dies, it's permadeath and you get a small tombstone for it. And that was mind-blowing in '93, still is. I'll show a trailer later so you guys don't need to kind of focus on the pictures, so to speak. So, we would use Unity. First of all, we were familiar with it. Second of all, it's got a massive amount of plugins that you can use. So you've got ready-made work that you just pay for. It's got a really great asset store, asset swap. It was, at that time, the only engine with free revenue model. So you would pay a small fee to get the whole engine to use, and you would not have to rev share, which, for example, Unreal Engine did that period. Also a very approachable engine anyway. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Unity here. We would do first prototype with boxes and capsules. We would iterate on the mechanics, camera, art style, audio, overall game feel, kind of work toward what our modernization of Cannon Fodder was. And for some reason, as we were a new indie team who was completely creatively free to do whatever they wanted, this part of the project took very long. I can't say for sure how many months it was, but it was a fairly, it was a very long period for making a prototype. Part of the fact was also that I personally had a lot of things to set up and do, and also there was a lot of things to learn for us as well. For example, middleware use. Whatever it came up with Unity, like we did the audio all of ourselves, there was a lot of things that we needed to kind of learn on the go. That always takes time, right? But we also felt like we had all the time in the world, so very dangerous pitfall, that one. After a while of working on the prototype, for some reason the Cannon Fodder kind of like our, let's say, most tidiest kind of implementation of what it would be in the modern era. It's just felt outdated and slow. And one would say that's an alarming sign in any game design or any game project, because this is what's going to happen. And I'm sure everybody is familiar with the feature creep, but it means that when you're not happy with something that you have, you start adding stuff on it, and that's supposed to make it better, which very rarely happens. You just make it into a big mess, right? Agreed? Well, you'll see. All right. So, as with any kind of feature creep situation, you start expanding the scope, because every type of feature or any type of design that you want to add to it is going to put more production time into your scope, right? So we wouldn't follow the safe and familiar scope of it. Instead, we were in a wonderland of opportunity, so to speak, with all the time in the world and being very carefree. And I did give out, though, my co-founder, you can throw rocks at me if you feel like I'm going overboard with this, but yeah, go ahead. This is how I see the project going. There was no real plan or definition of what the final product would be. Very dangerous. There was no beginning, no end of like how big is how long is the game going to be? How are we going to end it? How are we going to start it? There was just a collection of mechanics that really looked nice, and maybe looking nice isn't even really a good thing when you're at this stage of a development, because it could give you like false assumptions of how far you are in development. You're very early stage, but you're looking really good. Probably not the best way to go around. There was a story that we wanted to deliver, but didn't know how to do it, or at least we didn't have a plan on it, or let's say an assumption of how long it would take. And don't ask why. We wanted to put a story in it. Again, massive explosion of scope. As with everything, we would just be very short on hard assets, or any assets in general. We would have a need for more team members, but no way to pay them, of course, because we started with a very moderate amount of money to go with it. Plus, we weren't getting paid; we were living off grants, so no timetable. But still wanted to do some business. Yeah, we're in the games development scene. at some point, like, you should press pause, like if you're going through, let's say, into this type of tunnel. The wonderland of opportunity, I need to put a trademark on it. Yeah, so you can see we were running into trouble, and mainly because we didn't know what we were going to do, and we didn't know how we were going to achieve it, or how long it would take. Quite a lot of problems for any game project. So what we did was we got hit by reality and really didn't respond with grace, so to speak. We would stop talking and lose all honesty, which is the basis of any game project, is to keep on talking and telling each other that you are either doing a very good job or you're doing a very bad job or we're not functioning together as a team. Anything there is to say needs to be said out loud, very clearly, very honestly. We would start emotionally safeguarding each other and just keep on kind of like hoping that this would go away. Exponential stress increase. Details were very easy and nice to handle, so we would just keep on adding new stuff and focus on what was right in front of our nose instead of looking at the whole. And this was what we completely, this is what we focused on. Just put stuff in there and eventually it will go away, right? So too many hats. I only have one at the moment. I had 50 during the project. And one of the biggest issues with having too many disciplines at one person, or one person having too many responsibilities, is that switching from responsibility to the other takes time. And getting the focus again from, for example, looking at the details, or looking at the whole, or adding content internally, or promoting externally, they're all very different disciplines, all the very different mindsets. And going past those, switching from one to another takes time, and it takes a lot of brain power as well. Too much alcohol to compensate. It is a very kind of, and it's not even a joke, it is very kind of comforting to start drinking your troubles away with the creative team around you. After work, you go and have fun and kind of talk about the problems that you had during the day. But you're not actually talking about your problems, you're just creating more. If you're talking with a longer period of time, having alcohol in the mixture is not really what you want to do. You need a clear head to make the decisions that you need to do. And yeah, that was one of our problems as well. So this kind of stagnation period, in my opinion, can take months without intervention. So as you're adding more stuff, focusing on details and not kind of thinking about how to actually finish it, just work on it, yeah, it can take months if nobody's, you know, saying what to do. Here we go, a very kind of depicting picture of how I see that we were going through. Again, I see it very personally in this sense, and you can see this guy is not really, you know, is he doing games or what is he doing? You know, finding the next bar? He's got a lot of grit, but you know, what the fuck, man? Sort of French words. Oh yeah, you can spend another second with this guy. I barely know him now, but you know. All right. Of course, it didn't take too long, and as you know, we finished the game. We did deliver it. After this period, we would actually talk, honestly. We would go through the heavy discussions. We would also drink more, but just re-evaluating goals is what you need to do. So you expand your scope, at some point you're going to need to steer it back into a very tight delivery. You need a deadline, 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 you need a deadline need a deadline, we 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 need a. Let's say after the adjustment period, we had much time and we had to rush towards the end. We were late on getting press releases done. We were late with everything. Hindsight, we would have needed more polish. And there was quite a bit of, let's say, stress or importance put on this April date, since we were actually running out of money at that point. We had a cool website, which is not, unfortunately, online anymore. Price was $11.95, decent price for a game that's approximately 5 to 10 hours long, depending on how good you're with the mouse. And that's what happened. We sold about 300 copies during the first hours after launch. What you want is actually to get on top of the Steam sales, like kind of like get featured in the sense that if you sell enough in the beginning, you'll start climbing the ladder and people see your game more and then they will go after it and buy it more, and it's like a self-feeding loop. But what we got was nothing. So 300 copies sold after 2 years, approximately 2 years of work, felt quite like a blow in the face, in that sense. So we would pretty quickly realize that the sales would not be enough for us to continue to deliver new games or to kind of like self-support ourselves. I felt like a complete failure in all senses of the word. You guys know what I mean. Just delivering something that doesn't really sell and really fighting for getting there is almost like without exception, it feels like a complete failure of why you even wanted to do it. What I did was I joined a moving company, which was a fresh breeze because I finally got paid, and lifting boxes is a very, very kind of comforting thing to do after all this mental stress that you went through. Everybody else in the team settled in their own realities as well. Bills started piling up because we couldn't pay for them. They weren't too much, so nobody actually bankrupted us. In that sense, we still couldn't continue with the company. Like we didn't have anything to make it continue. We managed our shares of the debt because we were kind of partly financially responsible for it. Luckily, still remained friends. which is a great thing. I think these kind of experiences really easily can tear friendships, relationships apart. And everybody is still making games, yay! So we weren't completely destroyed. Random potions spawned from what we were doing. I joined Traplight. Everybody else is in their own realities at the moment. And that's about it, what the timeline says. There's a few learnings. Do I still have time? Yeah, a few moments. And again, these might seem like very simple things to kind of tell each other, but I keep on forgetting them with every game project I go to. Don't plan on getting successful or even financially stable with your first game. A first game with a new team. I see smiles in the audience, but you hear stories about it happening, but the odds are it won't. It's very a rare occasion that's gonna bring fortune for you with your first thing. So don't plan it. You need the continuity to come otherwise. Don't overestimate your capacity as a jack of all trades, which I did, mainly because of the adjustment time it takes to actually focus on different things and the brain power that you need to maintain all of those in a high quality level that you need to actually get the first point here. Starting your company with your friends might bloat your ego. Stay humble, stay honest. That's probably the biggest thing. So you really need to kind of keep on talking. You need somebody to be able to tell you that you are now on par with things or you're subpar, and you need to know that. Make the smallest possible product first, so we can talk about a vertical slice or an MVP, minimum viable product. Expand always with care, don't lose focus. Again, good thing to say, hard thing to remember, because once you actually do lose focus, and it's going to happen, you need to stop, you need to regain it, or you need to quit the project with a unanimous decision. Otherwise, you'll run into trouble. There's always more work than what you originally planned, and that's just the nature of the business. I'm sure you'll all agree on this one. Even though we were so against partners in the beginning, I would say always deal with the partner, because the biggest thing of focusing on your game, what you're doing, you actually need somebody external to tell you what actually is good about the game. You can't really decide it for yourself. And for that fact, it's very hard to kind of promote it in a very effective way. And having an external partner means that you have people who actually want to promote. They want you to succeed because they have their money and time invested in the game as well. Don't expect the launch day to bring massive success. There are just too many games launched every day. This applies to Steam games. This applies to my experience in dealing with Steam games. You need to reserve time after the project or after the launch date, because you probably won't hit those reviews or the sales that you wanted. And second point, don't stop after the launch. You just need to keep on promoting, and eventually, and hopefully, you'll raise the sales. You'll get the reviews you were looking for. You get most customers. You also get the first feedback, which means you can actually do something with the game. That it's very easy to update your games nowadays. It's not like the 90s, you need to send discs by mail. So just upload a patch and you're fixed, right? If there's something wrong with the game. And that's it. So thank you guys.
Hello? Yes,
Hello.
now it works. Thank you, Antti.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? We have, let's say, 5 minutes for questions, and then we're going to have another break before the next thing. All right, there's already one.
Thanks, Antti.
Hey.
I have a question about how do you decide which games to make now? For Action Legion, you decided just to copy Cannon Fodder games.
Yeah.
And this approach is some kind of luck access. To get a successful game with this approach,
Yes.
you have to be lucky.
Yeah.
And how
Good point.
do you decide now which titles to...
A Traplight?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a pretty much, well, now we're working with free-to-play games, and that's a rigorous process to go through. It's a very complicated case of different green lights inside our company, right? So somebody comes up with the concept. We already have a set of questions for, is this going to be a good free-to-play game? Is this a game that Traplight can make? Is this something that we want to make? First green light is in the concept stage. And we have a collection of people, seniors, juniors, saying, if we want to make it, if we can make it, and will somebody want to buy it? That's it.
Do you make
appears.
Hey, Antti.
Hey, Antti.
Hey.
Thank you. Great speech, and I can totally relate to the role of having so many hats.
Yeah. You can make a T-shirt, too many hats.
Yeah. It's all about the basically, and I remember also the times that there was a kind of like a hostility against publishers.
Yeah.
In the olden days.
Yeah.
At New Factory, and it was pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
With all in the mobile industry.
Yeah.
Also in Steam. And looking back now, with having those roles and everything, has your opinion changed?
Definitely.
With working with publishers,
yeah.
that could have helped you.
It was one of the learning points, definitely. Yeah. Like it's something that you like. I think one of the traps of like making games is like you really want to kind of be responsible, so it's your own, it's your baby, so you're very emotionally kind of attached to it. And then if you see some like money greedy publisher wanting their share of the deal, I think this is it's like a trope that we kind of have to deal with when we start making games. Once you fail miserably financially, you really kind of start missing the promo with it. And you also need to remember that these people also want you to succeed. They have something in that they're gonna get. And I'm sure Marina is gonna talk about working with the publisher in the last speech. It's gonna be very interesting. So, yes.
All right. Any more questions? We have time for, I think, for one, and then we're gonna have a break.
Yeah.
Can you pass this along?
Hello, Peter.
Yeah, hello.
I know everybody here.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk that deeply resonated with me, having experienced a very similar fate about the same time, actually. When you've been through all of this, do you see any hope for publishing stuff? That's dark, man. That's dark. 40% of games on Steam have always been released during the past year.
Yeah.
So, do you see any hope in that?
For like indie developers?
Yeah, for indie developers on Steam or platforms
I
like that?
do, but point is, I think people need to kind of realize what they're dealing with. Like, because I think people go into the indie business by following some dream that they've seen in Indie Game the movie. It might be very kind of, the realities are very different or let's say, you assume that there's something glorious in it when it's just very gritty work.
And when you're looking at the tip of an iceberg, basically.
Exactly. So I think we just need to set the reality straight of like what's going to come with it. And one of the points was like, start small, keep the focus, like just, you know, have something that you can deliver and not like emotionally destroy yourself on the process, which I'm sure
I've done that.
You've been there, right? So in that sense, like, I think one of the main reasons why I had this speech or why I went with this aspect is that like I want to tell people that you can do it, but you just need to kind of like reflect, right? So there's definitely hope. And like, you know, if there's people here who are aiming to publish or self-publish their Steam game, come and talk to me, you know, and like you, I'll be happy to give you my insights and maybe make it easier for you guys to like go forward with it. Answers your question?
Yeah,
Super.
thanks.
Do you still have hope?
Some.
I like that.
I like to think that we all have hope. This,
Yeah.
this is a hopeful event,
Yeah,
not like
Yeah.
about death and crying. Maybe later in the evening.
Yeah.
Let's give it one more time for Antti. And we have an almost 10-minute break. Let's continue 15 to 12 with Arto, with another post-mortem. Right, thanks.
itsellä tyyppimästi. Tämäkin on vielä semmoinen, että niinku mä löytin sen aika paljon
in 2007 year, and worked on over 10 titles in different roles, mostly as a game designer and level designer, and also some production and coding stuff. But it was really a crash course in game production for me. I came from a university background. Before university, I was actually doing educational games in Jyväskylä University. And this was my first real game industry job, and I learned a lot. There are 3 games I worked on the slide. There's Star Wars Clone Wars, there's Puzzle Quest, and there's Wall-E. I was a game designer on all of those. And one of the first things I learned was maybe first or second meeting with a kind of creative team meeting, and Markku Hakala, then pretty much the big honcho boss of DevCon1 told me and the other new guys that, okay, we are not here to make art, we are here to make, well, games. I don't think he said we are here to make money, but he basically made it sure that we don't think that we are here to make some really artsy games. We were here to make products that sell. And that was good. It was a good introduction. And I think the Universal, for the most time, the game production worked like a well-oiled machine. But the Universal was basically killed by THQ Wireless's short-sightedness. They were really good at looking back, and they really sucked at looking forward. So there was we were concepting this Indiana Jones game. We were actually given free rein to make any kind of Indiana Jones game we want. We were really happy about that. Yes, finally we didn't have to base it on any movie or game or anything. And then we made this, I think, a pretty good concept. And then we got it back, and they said, no, you can make it. Why not? Because we know that action and adventure don't sell, so make an Indiana Jones game that doesn't have action or adventure. Actually, the game did get made. It was, I don't know what it was called anymore, I don't remember, but it was basically a puzzle game. And that's okay, but I remember reading a review that it's a nice game, but it doesn't feel like Indiana Jones. I wonder why. We were also making, we were making an iPhone version of Clone Wars. That was a twin-stick shooter, but then the project was killed because THQ Wireless thought that twin-stick shooters will never work on iPhone. And then a year later, Minigolf sells hundreds of thousands of copies. Well, can't have it all. So I exited university in the first layoffs in spring of 2009. Because as you already heard, Tampere game dev scene was really different in that time. And I had basically 2 options: move to Helsinki or start a company. because they weren't really. Tentos was the only other company I knew, and they didn't have a game designer position at the moment, and I knew that I didn't want to move to Helsinki. As was quite typical in the ex-university employees at the time. I had a small amount of money to spend, so I knew that I have enough money to set up a company and buy like some computers and licenses. And we were also talking with Mika and others in Q Games, but Mika didn't want us, so. I did join Q Games later, but back then no. So and then what we were. So what's this Unity thing? I heard this new game engine, and first of like looks like a toy. Like, can you really make games with this stuff? And that's Unity 2 at the moment, 2.1. At least the Unity iPhone version was based on Unity 2.1. And we're like, I downloaded it. They had some like 1 month free trial period. So I downloaded it, started playing around, and like, hey, actually you can make a game with this engine. And then we were already in talks with Peter that we could like maybe start up a company. We had started some project back in the Universal days, and we're like, okay, let's see if we can do something together. And then we basically decided that we will set up a company that was eventually named Dicework Games. And it was set up in May of 2009. So the first steps, there was the iPhone, and the iPhone was really a lucrative platform at the time. We knew that there were several hits on the iPhone, but there was not that much competition yet. And the iPhone was, we came from the Java mobile background, so for me, the iPhone was a really powerful device. But on the other hand, it was just only one device at the moment. Well, there was iPhone 2G and 3G maybe, but they were basically the same phone. The other one was just a bit more powerful. So we didn't need to do stuff like porting it to multiple resolutions, which was always a big hassle in Universal games. So very much early on we decided we want to make iPhone games. It was easy to get in, it sounded good. And also we knew that there were almost no role-playing games on iPhone, and we were like, hey, at some point we might want to make a role-playing game, like first good iPhone role-playing game. So I started looking at iPhone development. I had an iPod at the time, iPod Touch. And so there was the Objective-C, I played around with that a little bit, and then with Unity, and pretty soon decided, okay, I can do this a lot better with Unity. And then we started working on our first game, after which we actually named the company. So, in the spring of 2009, we started working on a game called Diceworks. That's actually the first prototype I programmed. I had used Unity for less than a month, and I actually made the first prototype in 1 day. And the whole development of the game lasted maybe 2 months in the spring, and at the same time I was also learning Unity. So we decided on the game because it was simple, it was really easy to make. We could get it out quite fast, and we were both liking steampunk at the moment, so we decided to go for this steampunk aesthetic. For the idea of the game I had already back in Universal days, but I had been saving it for something else than Universal. So we released it in August 2009. Game was basically ready for 3 months before release, because we were waiting for Apple to sort out all the applications, and back then you actually had to send fax applications. You had to fax all the company papers to Apple, so they could go on through it, and it took if you were the company, you could also apply for the personal license, and that took maybe a week, but the company license took like 2 months. So we released Diceworks in August 2009, and it sold maybe 100 copies. But overall, I think making Diceworks was really, it didn't sell well, but we weren't, well, of course we were a bit disappointed, but still, it was the right call. Because we had a game out, we knew about like the basics of how to release a game on iPhone, all this hassle was done, so we knew that okay, now we are a real company in a sense that we have actually released something. So during the summer, while waiting for the Apple license, we were trying new ideas like, okay, what should we do after this? What's the next game? And we went through several different concepts. One of them was Dragon Holden, which is basically a poker fantasy card game. And then we had this airship game called Steampunk Airship Shooter. That was actually, we worked on this like for a month at least, trying to get it. Was basically a shoot 'em up game with tower defense elements, which sounded like a really cool idea, but we never got the design to really work. And we also had this nice steampunk, wintry, post-apocalyptic world thought out for the game. And then we had this one early prototype for roguelike in 1 or 2 days. I was like, okay, yeah, roguelikes are fun, maybe one would work on iPhone if you would get the consoles right and everything. I built this really simple prototype, and that eventually became our magnum opus, Remnant, the Hammer of Thor. Which honestly began as let's make a small roguelike for iPhone. And like this is the earliest image I could find of the game. Like this is basically the art style we nailed in the beginning, and it didn't really change during the production. So yeah, it started as a prototype on how to make roguelike controls work on iPhone, and it was actually originally it was a portrait game in the portrait mode. But then we, because of art and stuff, we eventually decided to make it landscape. The first planned release was by the end of 2009. Yeah, we did not make that. And we came up with the idea for the game, Nazi Vikings! Yeah, and that's how it was actually born, how the Hammer of Thor came into the picture. But we actually played down the Nazi thing because we were a bit afraid of what Apple would do, and because it was quite a black box, like you never knew how Apple would react to anything, so we had to downplay the Nazi thing a bit. But then we went into the prolonged production. So the 6-month game turned into a lot longer. We really built the project on Touch Arcade forums in early 2010, and we got a lot of interest. A lot of people were like, hey, that looks really cool, it looks like World of Warcraft, that's so cool, and oh yeah, people are liking this, yes. But then, and then we landed to publish Crescent Moon Games. They had just published, like 6 months earlier, they had developed this game, published by the, I don't remember what its name, but basically EA's mobile publishing brands. They had published a game, Raven's Sword, that had sold like hundreds of thousands of copies of really big. Yeah, we have a really good. Now they wanted to publish other games, and yes, we have and we did have a really good match because they had made their reputation with role-playing games. We were making a role-playing game. That's really cool. But then something happened because we realized, okay, we were reading these people who were really excited and asking things about our game. We realized that they're not looking for a small roguelike. They were looking for an actual role-playing game, and the scope began to grow. We already had grown it a bit, and then we realized that no, we can't release a small game. We have to do something that these people would actually want to play, like what they expect the game to be. So then began the long, hard road of actually making the game ready. And in summer of 2010, we were there. But then Apple decided that no, we don't like game engines, and they almost banned Unity. It was really close, like Unity was already making plan B's, like how they would actually replace C# with C++ and stuff like that, because Apple didn't like the C#. But then Apple completely turned around and started embracing Unreal Engine and Unity at the same time, probably because they couldn't just say Unreal is fine, but Unity is not. So basically they decided, yeah, engines are fine, because we had no plan B. We could have maybe launched on Android, but the Android market wasn't there, especially for paid games, and we didn't have any Android phones or anything, so and we didn't really have any money. We were working with startteraha, the startup money, and so we didn't have any money to spend on like devices at the point. So in the summer, we crunched the weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks, maybe. It wasn't that long for crunch, but yeah, we crunched and finally finalized the game and released it in beginning of September in 2010. So, in 2010, the release was upon us, and we were like, yeah, well, we were actually #1 in RPG category in the US. We got a okay feature from Apple, but not a big one, so a bit disappointed. And we got really good reviews. All the reviewers loved the game, and most of the people who played the game loved the game. And it made about 10,000 euros in the first month. This is really me trying to remember things because I don't have this written down anywhere. So that was about, and so we were happy that people liked it, but on the other hand, we were a bit disappointed of sales because we knew that, okay, 10,000, yeah, we can go a bit further, but not that far. So we had to figure out what to do next. So we decided on to go on the update road. So we would make updates and hope that they can like sell the game in the long run. And then it was early 2010 when Apple actually released iPad and iPhone 4. Until that point, we had been working on a device that was one resolution, 640 times 320. And everything was made for that resolution, and then bam, Apple goes like, we have these new devices, this has like 4 times the resolution, and this has like something in the middle, and now you have to do the job of actually porting the game to different resolutions. Like, no! But you know, we already had made all the 2D assets and the UI, so basically we had to do a really lazy port for those. It worked on them and had the native resolution, but on iPhone, all the 3D assets scaled nicely, but the UI was, on the iPhone 4, it was basically just double the pixels in the original UI, so it didn't look as pretty as it could have on the device. And then we made also a post-game content update. And also, of course, I broke the game in the asset store. In the App Store, we did some updates, like bug fix updates, and then I started working on the new content and the porting and everything, and I just had the project all over. We didn't have any, basically we couldn't even use any kind of version control with it. At that time with Unity, it just didn't really support it, except the expensive Unity's own, and we couldn't really afford that. So I broke the game because I didn't test it truly with the update, so you could play it until the last enemy, last boss, and then when you killed the last boss, nothing just happened. So they get a lot of 1-star reviews, like the game is broken, it doesn't end, it just bugs out. And like, no, I can't even release a simple update because I don't have a working project in my hands. So we had to wait until early 2011 when we released the content update to actually fix that bug. But after that, people again liked the game. So in early 2011, we were facing a crossroads again, like, okay, we're pretty much done with this game. What's next? Do we make a sequel or do we make a PC port? So we did have quite a lot of plans for the sequel, and also we talked a lot, like how would we change the mechanic in the game. A lot of people liked the dice rolling mechanics, so that was nice. And I just realized I haven't really told anybody what the game was like, but of course everybody knows. Yeah, basically it was turn-based RPG with the dice rolling mechanic from Hero Quest, where you could also reroll the dice, and that was something everybody liked. So, what's next, sequel or PC port? Well, we didn't have that much money. We still had some money coming in for the game, but it wasn't enough to pay any really good salaries or anything. And back then there was no Steam Greenlight. So if you wanted to get on Steam, you had to actually pitch your game to wall. There were some smaller indie game PC places where you could sell your game, but on all of them were really small, like you could get maybe hundreds of sales if you were lucky. But still, because we were ambitious and we wanted to move on to PC, because PC was cool, of course, we decided on the PC port. And we started remaking stuff like, okay, there's some things we can pretty easily turn into PC, like the 3D, add some shadows, nicer lighting and stuff like that. We redid the UI, we redid the intro, story, and controls, of course, for the PC. And then we had a rudimentary level editor also, so you could make your own levels with something that really wasn't possible on the mobile. And then we went to Indiegogo to get some 30,000 to finish the actual PC port, and we failed spectacularly. We got like 500 euros. So yeah, it didn't go too well. Why? Because we didn't really have any marketing, and we weren't really good at marketing. I really sucked at marketing. We did have this one marketing agency who were like, okay, we can work with you on a kind of revenue share basis, you don't have to pay anything upfront. Okay, yes, that sounds good, we get these guys to do marketing, they're actually good at it, they know people, they know how to do it, and then their boss decided, like, what are you doing? This won't make any money, and kicked all the indie guys out and decided to have a real marketing agency instead, and then we were like, okay, we don't have marketing anymore. But we had to go to Indiegogo anyway, we didn't really see any options, and it failed. So, in retrospect, how did Rhinelands do? We actually had a pretty okay numbers, I'd say 60,000 copies sold lifetime. Again, from the memory, I don't have access to any kind of sales data anymore because it's not in the App Store anymore. A revenue, I would say, was 50 to 60,000 euros. For us, the original price was $5. But we sold majority in sales of like $1 sales. And even one point we actually tried to, like it was maybe 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old at point again, and I just emailed the publisher, maybe we could try and lower it to $3, see what happens. Like, well, it's a bit older game, so I think it's, at this time we can sell it for a bit lower amount, and then we watched it for like 2-3 months, and the price change did exactly nothing to our total revenue. So if it was $5, it made the exact same money when it was $3. So then we decided, like, let's put it back to 5 because I think the game deserves it. But it did have a surprisingly good long tail for like a couple of years of $300 to $400 a month, or euros a month, which was a bit surprising, and it was something we really didn't expect it at first, and if we would have known this, we would have made really different decisions. Because in 2011 we were still working on the PC version, it really took way too long. And Redacted begins. We had this subcontracting project, I can't really talk about which game it was. It was subcontracting for Redacted. But let's say they were friends of ours. But the problem, and we were asked, like, can you do this game? And then, okay, yeah, we need money, so let's do it. But they were promising us a bit better payout, like when you get like through this first couple of months, we could maybe pay you better. But they never could, so we made a really little profit on the amount we were paid for making it. But yeah, so we decided at the end, even though it was a steady income, we would want to make something else, and we were already running out of money anyway, so we decided let's make a small game. And the Redacted game was actually, well, we probably should have finished it, but let's talk more about it later. So, after that we decided we want to make one more game, let's do something simple, something that's fast to finish, so our Springtime game was called Trouser Heart. It began in summer of 2012 as a project called Epic Adventure. It was basically Peter's concept. He wanted to have a pretty good concept for a small action-based, like a hack and slash game. And we were okay, we will finish in a couple of months. That's easy. Let's do it, then we can get at least some kind of revenue, because the revenue from Rhinelands was slowly drying out. Let's make it simple. Let's make the art style really fast to work on something like really low poly, so we can make the art faster. And let's have an almost zero text and UI because we hate making UIs like most people maybe. So we wanted something like really simple UI. And then the epic adventure turned into epic project scale. The 2 months eventually turned into a year. But then we landed a heavy publisher. Thank you, Tentons, for believing in us. The game was really simple, but it turned out to be quite complicated. And well, in the game we had some kind of procedural randomly generated content, so trying to get that right turned out to be quite difficult, and also getting the gameplay feel really smooth. I think we actually managed to make the gameplay feel really good in the end, but wasn't enough, and we didn't really have a good overall design goal. We know that we want to make a small hack and slash game and have various ideas on like how hardcore do we want it to be, how casual do we want it to be. So we basically maybe wanted to make a more hardcore game, but then again we knew that the market was a lot more better for the casual games. So in 2013 we released Trouser Heart. It was released for iOS, Android and Windows Phone. I don't think we did any other ports. And the sales were pretty meager. So we had a good publisher. They did, like Tendons did everything they could. I don't really have anything bad to say about them. But sometimes it just didn't hit the right notes or something. And it was a paid game at the time where free-to-play was really rising. So, but fortunately, it won a Unity Microsoft competition that was worth $300,000, and that pretty much made back all the money that had been spent on it by the publisher. So, but for us, no. So 2013, the end. We did do, after the released, I did some porting and fixing still. And then I got this phone call from a guy who said that he was from Power Park and then he wanted us to make him a JRPG. So I'm like, yeah, sure, do you know, like, how much does it cost? I was sure, like, I had these phone calls multiple times before, like, yeah, I want you to make us a game, okay, how much does it cost? And then I say like 100,000, they were like, beep, 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 beep. But this guy was like, okay, sounds good. All right, so, well, we knew that eventually it would take so long to seal the deal that then I got a call from Mika from Good Games, like, do you want to come work for us? I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to pay the rent somehow, so let's go there. And then we decided, okay, let's just merge the companies and let's do the RPG with Good Games. So, well, best of both worlds, I think it ended quite well because, well, now all the IPs are with Good Games, and actually Trouser Heart was, I think, quite recently out on Switch. So if you want to play that game, I haven't played the Switch version, but I think it's a really perfect fit for that platform. So what's left? What's the heritage of the Iceboard games? First of all, Rhinelands is still mentioned occasionally. So we did have this, like a couple of years ago, Dutch Arcade did this Reloaded or something series where they would go back to old games, and they did one on Rhinelands, and the people were really liking it. When we announced Ruan back for the mobiles on the Dutch Arcade forum, a lot of people were like saying, hey, but what about new Rhinelands? I love Rhinelands. So people still like the game. Yes, many people remember it fondly, but not many enough. And yeah, Trouser Heart is now on Switch, so you can play that. And yeah, IPs are owned by Q Games. So I can't speak for them, so hopefully they maybe Rhinelands rises again at some point in some form, let's hope so. So, what were our biggest screw-ups? First of all, Rhinelands PC, way too ambitious, really, no. What we should have probably done is started on sequel with almost the same art style and like not do it, basically do kind of the same game again with new content. Probably would have sold enough to again keep us making more and more games, and with all the long tail styling we could have maybe had a pretty good company, and then maybe move on to PC when the Green Line came out and everything. Also, not finishing. That was also, well, yeah, but it was steady income. It was actually a prequel for a really well-known action RPG series on mobile. So, if we had finished the game, even if we wouldn't have made that much money for the company, we would have had a lot more reputation because, hey, we made for this big series, we made a game, and that would have made our life a lot easier in the long run. And of course, the browser hard, making it for 12 months was just not something we could have done actually. So, what did I learn? What did we learn during the 4 years of Dice World games? When the iron is hot, you really need to keep pounding it because, yeah, starting to do something that takes as long as the PC board, it's just, for Turk, it's just not sensible. So we should have, as I said, made more remnants on the mobiles. It had already the audience on the mobile side was a bit stupid to think that it could so easily find a new audience on the PC. Also curb your ambition. Don't go reaching for the stars too soon. Just maybe make something smaller first. Like Diceworks was really good thing, and even though it didn't make money, it helped the company in other ways a lot. And yeah, don't put your apples in the single basket, especially if it's the Apple basket, because you never know what Apple does next. Yeah, so that was it. Time for questions, and thank you for listening.
Check. Yes, no, it's working. Thank you, Arto. I think we have some questions here. Antti is the first one. Go ahead.
Hello, Arto.
Hey, Antti.
Hey, I wanted to know, in your biggest screw-ups, you said we did the wrong things.
Yeah.
What was your decision-making process, and how did you come up with those decisions? Because, that was the thing you did wrong. What would you have done better in the process itself?
Good question. We didn't have I can't say that we had a process. We basically just were bickering and arguing amongst ourselves until we had some kind of conclusion. I don't really remember exactly how we ended up doing the PC version. Probably had something to do with ambition and ego, and might have been my call, what it was. So, yeah, I can't say how we ended up doing that exactly. We didn't have a process. We should have had a process. That's also a learning. We should have actually thought about these things a bit further, where's our audience and stuff like that.
Cool, thank you.
All right, there's more questions. Can you pass behind you?
Thanks for your presentation. I have a question. In that time, roguelike games were trendy. And it looks like your Rhyme World had a good potential. Why did not you decide to change this game to free-to-play mode? I think with free-to-play it earned 5 times more after you changed the model.
Yeah, that would have been true if the final game would have actually been a roguelike, but it turned out to be a pretty linear RPG with some roguelike elements. So we had only part of the content was randomly generated, and that was mostly because it was faster and because we had already done some kind of generator for the. But the actual game was not really a roguelike, so we couldn't have done it as free to play.
More questions? Okay. Let's give one more time for Arto. And don't go yet. So next we have lunch starting at past. And yes, there's a lunch table, the buffet table set up for us. It has the DevCon text on it, and then there's tables that also say DevCon, so use those. If you have any dietary restrictions or questions about that, the kitchen will be able to answer. But there is some
normal food, and then there's I think vegan option, so for vegetarians and other. But if you have any other stuff, please ask the kitchen. What else I was supposed to say? Yes, we have a discount to Game Museum with this. So if you have time, because we have an hour and a half for lunch, so please go visit the Game Museum. They also have a new exhibition called It's a Trap. So yay, support Trap Light. We have nothing to do with the exhibition actually, sadly. But there's a tabletop gaming exhibition. Role-playing game. But they said tabletop as well. Okay, thank you for the correction. So please go to Game Museum, go check out the thing.
It's open up to 6.
And yes, I was going to say that when we finish, but yes, the Game Museum is open until 6, so you can also go after we finish at 5, because you can come to sauna already at 5:30, but preferably around 6 or something. So, but yeah, thank you for the early hours of today. Go eat and come back like 25 past. No wait. 5 minutes to 2 or something, or 10 minutes to 2. All right, thank you so much.